property market update predictions. What do you think's going to happen now? What would your advice be for sellers to ensure they're getting a fair price? When selling your house, should you allow people to view your house that are not in an immediately proceedable position? When it gets to the stage of finding a reliable conveyancer, what do you think is the key things there?
What would you say can be done for people who are stuck in chains that are causing quite long delays?
Should a buyer renegotiate after survey? Welcome. So we are joined today by a head of sales, Steph Briscoe. Steph, welcome.
Thank you.
We are doing another. Last time we've done one of these, I was looking, was February 2023, almost 18 months ago. And
Wow.
I said on that one that we're going to do more of them because we love to answer the most common questions that we get asked as agents on these videos, put them out there to the world so it helps loads more people. So here we are. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump straight into it and let's talk about, it was announced this morning that we now have a Labour government. We're not going to talk about politics, but we are going to jump straight into your H2, half two of the year, property market update predictions. What do you think is going to happen now?
What's going to happen in the market now? It's going to be an interesting one, I think. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. So new government, there are going to be changes coming in that none of us are necessarily going to be aware of. But there are lots in Labour's manifesto about the housing market and how they're going to improve it and what they want to do to bring in more affordable housing and things like that. And especially they want to bring in this freedom to buy. So there'll be some sort of like guarantee scheme for any buyers who don't really have the deposits together and things like that. So it should, if these things do come about, it should, in theory, help the bottom end of the housing market quite significantly. And as we all know, if the bottom end starts moving, then ultimately the whole market's going to continue. It's going to ripple up to everybody. So that's going to allow the people in those sort of more starter homes to move on to their next home, etc., etc., etc. So it could, if they do everything that they say they're going to, it could lead to some positive changes in the market. I think it's just going to take us a little bit of time to find our feet again now with the change.
I think totally agree. Kickstart the bottom, domino effect. Rents have got ridiculous, and so I think it's a good thing that we try and help the bottom of the market more. They were priced out by investors and that kind of thing. But you're right. I think this year is going to be the only real positive this year, and we'll kind of segue onto that, I suppose, is I don't think the change of government's going to change much for the rest of this year because they've also got 5 years to do what they propose to do. But what we'll do will be the interest rates, which, fingers crossed, are going to start coming down at some point soon. What do you think's going to happen there? And how does that relate to mortgages?
Yeah, so the interest rates won't necessarily directly impact mortgages immediately. So ultimately, if there's a change to the base rate, that's brilliant. And obviously, it's a really good reflection on what the economy is doing. But ultimately, mortgage rates are not necessarily suddenly going to drop just because the base rate does, which I think what a lot of people expect to happen. It's like that automatic, well, interest rates have come down. That is going to immediately impact people on a standard variable rate or anything like that. So it will be beneficial to people who have, mortgages on their current properties that are variable. But for anyone who's on a fixed rate or anyone who's getting a new mortgage or anything like that, the mortgage rates, they're determined by something called the yield curve rather than the base rate. So at some point they'll come down, but we've got to bear in mind as well that at the moment as it stands, depending on your loan to value, you're looking at probably about 4.37 up to maybe 5.19 as an interest rate anyway. So they're already below where the base rate is. So it's not going to be a case that suddenly the base rate comes down and then mortgage rates drastically drop. So if anyone's expecting that to happen, I wouldn't put your search on hold to see what sort of immediately comes of it, because you're probably going to be waiting quite a long time. And you don't then know what's going to happen to house prices in the meantime. So it might not be beneficial.
And this is an interesting thing because most people are predicting, agreeing that rates will start to creep down a little bit this year, in the second half of this year. Whether they will, whether they won't, we need to wait for the latest inflation figures. But I'm looking now kind of how is it going to look at the end of 2025? And a lot of people are suggesting it will be 3 or 4% base rate by the end of 2025. I think it'll be more like 4%, but I'm no economist. But I know we've got a hell of a lot of debt to repay, and so that has to be done somehow. What would you say with mortgage rates? I was surprised, speaking to a mortgage advisor yesterday, just how reasonable they are compared to the base rate. I think there's a lot of people out there renting right now that are thinking, "Oh, there's no point looking to buy because the base rate's 5.25." But actually, it has very little relevance because lenders are scrapping for the business, right? Basically.
Yeah, and what you've got to remember with lenders as well, because the news can sometimes, they like to blow things out of proportion, as we know, when it comes to the housing market and mortgage rates. You'll sometimes see headlines where lenders say, Nationwide, for example, have dropped their rates, or oh my gosh, Santander have put their rates up. And actually, we've got to remember that all lenders change their rates daily. Like,
Hmm.
it's not a case that suddenly Santander are putting their rates up and it's going to have this astronomical effect on the mortgage market. It's just that at that moment in time, Santander have suddenly got a lot of business, so they're putting their rates up because they don't want to encourage loads of new business to come in. They need a bit of a breather. And then when it comes to a point where they've got through that sort of push of business, then they'll drop their rates again to get more in again. So lenders are constantly changing their rates based on business levels and things like that as well. So if you ever see the media saying there's been a big increase or decrease, it's not really anything to necessarily jump at straight
And
away.
that's probably counterbalanced by another lender has reduced them. So it's
Absolutely.
shopping the whole market. I guess that's the key takeaway, and it is get yourself a really good whole of market broker that's reviewing the rates for you daily. That's the
Yeah.
point. Go to one bank, you're stuck with their rates. Have a good broker on your case. Because I read somewhere that I think the average shelf life of a mortgage deal 2, 3 years ago was like 6 months. Now it's like 6 days. It's
Yeah.
crazy. So onto that, I suppose then, because interest rates are higher, the cost or the cost to own property is higher. Um, what would your advice be for sellers to ensure they're getting a fair price?
I think what sometimes sellers forget is that, generally speaking, if you're on the market and you're marketed in the right way, so by that, I mean, you're not just, I mean, you hear of some agents who don't even go on the big portals and things, and they just try and sell the properties behind the scenes, which if you need some sort of low key marketing strategy or something like that, you know, that works. Like, we do it for people who need to keep the sale on the down low. But for anybody else, you have to be out there on the mainstream portals because it's the main way that buyers are looking for properties these days. Yes, call your agents. Yes, people will go in and see them, but ultimately they're just sit there looking on Rightmove or Zoopla or on the market or whichever website is their preference ultimately. So you've got to be on those, but you've also got to have an agent who's proactive and doing things behind the scenes. We're not in a market anymore whereby you can just sit there and hope for the best. As an agent, you have to be pushing a property, selling a property, constantly speaking to people about a property, reviewing the marketing, doing everything else behind the scenes of it as well. If you, as a seller, have an agent who's doing that and is doing that properly for you and is really putting it out there to the whole of the market, and you know that it's getting as much exposure as possible, you're going to get the price that you need in the way of offers. Now, again, having the right agent to negotiate the offers then really effectively to get the best price is important. But a house will naturally find its selling position on the market. So if you go on for too much money, people will make you really low offers because it's not worth that much money. Normally, lower offers than you could potentially get. If you go on for realistic money or enticing prices, then ultimately you're going to get more interest and you're going to get people then offer you more. So it will be a case that naturally the house will find its selling point on the market.
So it kind of comes down, I guess, to like just have peace of mind that you've got the fair price once you can tick the box that says I've exposed the property to the widest possible, biggest audience with all kinds of marketing channels, main portals. Buyers have got preference. Some use Rightmove, some use Zoopla, some use on the market. Like, just got to be in all of them. You can't tick the box that says I've exposed myself to that audience if you're not on them. Then I guess it comes down to when the offers come in, making sure that your agent's qualifying them properly, negotiating properly. I was looking this morning and our average increase from initial offer to offer agreed is 4%. And that's pretty amazing. I don't think most agents, one, track it, so they wouldn't know. But if they did track it, I would put us right up there because we really do major in the negotiation ability.
Yeah.
And one thing not to do, this is what I had the other day. I had a call from a buyer and they said, amazing news, I've got a full asking price offer on my house. And I was like, wow, I didn't know you went on the market. They're like, no, I didn't. The agent just rung me and said, I've got a buyer who would love to see your house. And they offered me the asking price. And I'm like, that's not good, because what if there was another two or three or four buyers that were prepared to offer you more if they were given the opportunity? So I think market exposure right now, particularly now, is so important. Back in the day when the market was different, you could use the fear of loss because the market was rising to get the best price from potentially a buyer by not going to market. But now you have to expose it to a full, thorough marketing campaign, including social. I saw a comment the other day on one of your videos that said, "I watch every one of your videos and can't wait to see the next one," something like that.
Yeah,
And
she was in a situation where she was nowhere close to moving at this moment in time, but she watches every single video that goes up there with any properties. So you can guarantee that she might not be ready to move, but she might be speaking to people who are. She might be sharing those videos for people who are. And then when the time is right and she is ready to go, she'll be hot on social media to find something, because she'll see it as a really good way of finding a property now.
well, I can also guarantee, so desire drives readiness or time. So I bet you any money, the minute you put something up that she likes the look of, that ticks her boxes of 3 bedrooms, garage, driveway, right side of town, she'll be like, Steph, can you get mine on the market ASAP? So it generates. I've sold so many properties over the years to people that rung from a board, let's say, and they were like, I weren't actually looking, but I said to my wife years ago, if that house ever comes on the market, I want it. So
I did it.
board exposure as well. Yeah.
I did it personally once. I literally always wanted a house down a particular road, was not ready to move, but the minute a house came up that I really liked the look of, I pushed forward and got it done. Like you do. And it's why I'm so hot on what we call the passive buyer. So like you say, the people who aren't ready to move necessarily, they're not thinking about it, but they will jump if the timing's right or the right house comes on, because I've been one of them. I know it's not just a thing that we're saying, it is something that's out there. So you've got to, I always say, do everything to make sure your house can't be missed. Don't sit there and kind of say, actually, yeah, I think I'll use social media, or I'll use this, or I'll use portals or whatever else. Do all of it so that there's absolutely no way that anybody, whether they're looking for a property or not, can miss your house. And that's the way you're going to get the highest offers.
It's really interesting with social marketing, because what I say about that is it ain't about the person watching the video. It's about the person watching the video and who they know.
Mm.
It could be someone at the school saying, "Oh, really, really looking for a house in Heavers Avenue." All of a sudden, her mate sees one pop up on social on like a pre-launch period and tags her in, and it's offered over asking price. On that though, a really good question for you that I've just thought about is, when selling your house, should you allow people to view your house that are not in an immediately proceedable position?
So I think in this market, you should be letting most people view your property. I say most people because there are still some people who are just out there thinking, what do I do with my Saturday? Let's fill it, let's do some house viewings. And they have zero intention of moving whatsoever. And they're not viewing your property because it's a special property that might pique their fancy. They're just out there looking at properties for fun. So you can generally determine from a phone call as an agent whether that's what someone's doing, or whether it's a case that they are potentially quite a serious buyer. But right now, as it stands, I'm saying to my clients, let everyone view it, whether they're on the market or not. Because I mean, I've got one, for example, at the moment, which is it's a stunning house. I want to say little house because from the outside it looks tiny, but actually the second you walk through the door, you realize how much space there actually is. It's a real TARDIS, and it's one of those really beautiful houses as well. It's on Povey Cross Road in Hookwood, and
Hmm.
it's one that every time I speak to anybody, whether they're a potential client or looking for a property or just my hairdresser, they go, oh God, you've got that house that's on the market that I've always driven past and wondered what it looks like. Like, it's a really lovely home. And they were on the market with another agent previously and barely had any viewings, barely had any interest. And I personally think part of that was because the agent didn't want to show round unproceedable buyers. I don't think the client particularly wanted unproceedable buyers through the front door, but the agent never then explained to them why it's really important to have them still view. So now they've come on with me. We immediately in the first week, I think, got the same number of viewings as the previous agent had the whole time they were marketing in their, I want to say, 16-week contract that they were tied into. But ultimately, we immediately got lots of viewings through the door, and we've now got two parties, both of whom are unproceedable, but both of whom have put their own houses on the market just purely to try and secure this house. So there is then a point to doing it, because again, those people you guarantee are going to be probably more likely to pay more money for it because they want to secure it really badly, and B, we've now got two people who want it, therefore we've got the competition back as well.
Yeah,
So
so that house, I know what I'm talking about. It's a landmark. I'll probably put that as everyone knows it. I totally agree. I believe everybody should be able to view a house, subject to some small qualification. Like some agents insist on seeing this, seeing that before allowing them to view the house, and I'm like, look, as long as the security aspects ticked off properly, just let them have a look at the house. What's the problem? And what you've done there is you've doubled their chances of selling, because either someone that is proceedable comes along and views the house, or, well, they've got three times more chance of selling, or one of the two that are interested in buying it might get a buyer for their house, and all of a sudden they're now proceedable. I did chat with a client the other day, and I said to him, the trouble you've got is, I know it's not nice to get the kids out, get the dogs out, tidy the house up, all this for someone who's not proceedable. But I agreed a sale about 4 months ago now. They registered to view a house, probably to sell, not on market. Can I view it, please? I said, yeah, absolutely. Um, and they ended up loving it so much that what I wouldn't have known at the point of booking the viewing is that they've got no mortgage on their house, their current house. So what they ended up doing for not losing this house was to bridge and borrow against their mortgage-free house to buy it. So at the end of the viewing, they were proceedable because they loved it so much. So I think that's a really good point. As what you say, most should be allowed to view. You'll get the best outcome. That comes back to exposure, doesn't it, as well? What's the point in exposing it to a huge audience if you're only going to allow one third of that audience or half that audience to take a look at it?
Well, I always remember being told when I was first in a state agency, don't make decisions on behalf of other people. Don't make assumptions, don't make any decisions for anybody else. So there were times that when I was very, very long time ago, sadly now, but when I was starting out and I wouldn't tell people about a particular property because from what they told me, I just didn't think it was going to work for them. I didn't think it was going to tick the boxes. And I remember my manager at the time saying, but what right is it of yours to take the decision whether or not to view it away from those people? It's not your
Mm.
decision to make. And I think that kind of still applies to ultimately if someone wants to view your house, what right is it of yours? I appreciate it's your home, but it's their decision as to whether or not they would want to move forward with it and how they would move forward with it. Because I've had exactly the same situation in the last year where again somebody else ended up, they actually said they'd take out a bridging loan to try and make it work. We ended up actually selling their house very quickly anyway, and it all tied in and worked perfectly anyway. But again, it's that person's decision as to how or not, like how they want to make it work or not make it work at all. It's not down to a seller or an agent, really.
So I guess the flip side of that is to ensure they get a fair price, they should maximise exposure, have a good agent in their corner who majors in negotiation to get the best price possible, and to understand that it's not all about the price. There's other areas that you can use in negotiation to get a good outcome for everybody.
How does that then flip round to a buyer to ensure that they're also paying a fair price?
Yeah, I guess, because a lot of sellers are buyers as well. The only buyers who aren't sellers are first time buyers, and that's only one portion of the market. So it's a bit of a double edged sword, isn't it, when you're moving house, because we specialize in home movers, helping someone get from A to B into their next chapter. But I guess the worry for buyers at the minute is to make sure they're not overpaying for a house. And my general advice to buyers is, does it tick your boxes? Can you afford it? Would you rather risk losing it, offer what you can afford to buy it ultimately? And the saving grace on that, what I say to everybody is, your bank's going to go and have a valuation on it anyway. So that's your reassurance. And believe me right now, if a bank feels like you're paying too much, they are going to tell you and they're going to downvalue it. If the bank agrees with the valuation, then that's your kind of permission to proceed and that you're not overpaying for it. This kind of takes me on a little bit, not on a rant, but the difference between a valuation and market value. So I speak to a lot of people being like, well, my house was valued last month by a Rick Surveyor at 400,000. And I'm like, the trouble is that that's totally irrelevant to market value. Market value is determined by demand. Valuation, red book valuation, is decided by someone that's not buying it but went to university. So sometimes market value at that time might be a bit less than the valuation, and many times market value can be a hell of a lot more than the red book valuation because you've got lots of people wanting the same house. That's a little segue sideline.
I think you're right as well in terms of a mortgage surveyor is never going to allow a bank, especially at the moment, because lenders are tough at the moment. Their criteria is very tight. They're not really doing much kind of away from the norm, or they're not taking any risks. They're very, very risk averse right now. So if you've got a surveyor who's going in and valuing the property at the price you're paying for it, you've got nothing to worry about in that sense, as far as I'm concerned. But I also think I had it recently with one of my sellers who has sold a lovely little 2-bed that, and is kind of finding their next family home. And this is the one that they're probably going to want to be in for quite a while. They've sold their first home, sort of starter home, and now this is their longer term. And we were at a bit of a stalemate in that I'd found them a buyer. That was all good. They'd offered on another property, and the seller of that property was also offering on something else. And it was a case of trying to get the chain as a whole to work rather than just that person offering on that, accept or reject, and then move on to the next. We were trying to get the whole thing tied up in a way that everyone was going to be happy. Luckily, I knew the agent at the very top of the chain, because I then got the information passed to me that we were 10,000 adrift from where we needed to be. My sellers, from speaking to the agent dealing with the property they were negotiating on, and obviously I'm not going to name names, but they were adamantly telling me no, they weren't prepared to pay more money for it. They were at their max. And it got to the point where we were just told, well, it's not going to go anywhere. And the agent in the middle just gave up and said, well, that's that. I can't get them up, end of. And all it took was about a 3-minute conversation where I said to them, this is your long-term property. Are you really prepared to walk away and lose it for the sake of 10,000? And they sort of went, maybe. I said, okay, what about 5,000? Are you prepared to lose it for 5,000? At the end of the day, that's not actually a heck of a lot of money in the grand scheme of things nowadays for a home that you want to stay in for a long time. And they agreed and they went up by 5,000. The seller at the very top then dropped by 5,000. We had a lovely deal. It was all good to go. And it was just sometimes posing that question and putting to a buyer, you're not overpaying if it's something that you want long term and you're going to stay in long term. Because you can almost guarantee the house prices will have gone up a heck of a lot in 20 years' time. You're not going to lose that 5,000.
So that's great. That's great estate agency and great negotiation. Hate this saying, but thinking outside the box, sitting there thinking, right, how can this happen? That person at the bottom of the chain is now paying £5,000 more potentially than they originally agreed to pay. They might have had £1,500 a month's worth of rent. So another 6 months of not buying that house is cost them more than the £5,000 then to get the house they really wanted. And look, people will know. Buyers have access to the whole market, so they will know if that house is good or bad value at £5,000 more, and then it's for them to decide. So it's. I think the great tip there is just ask the question. Too many agents, back to what you said the other a bit earlier as well, is they kind of manifest an answer to a question on behalf of somebody else and say, oh no, they won't pay anymore. Okay, cool. Have you asked them? No. Okay, well, how about you ask them? And then if they say no, then we can cross that bridge. But what's happened is a really clever renegotiation ultimately is getting 3 families moved. So that's awesome.
And we're all guilty of doing that and manifesting as well, don't we? I've got an offer come in this morning, and the first thing I thought was, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to tie up or not. I don't know if the sellers are going to come down. I don't know if the buyer's going to go up. Like, I don't know where that's going to land. And in my head, I'm starting to think of all these conversations and scenarios that might happen. And every time I have to give myself a bit of a reality check again and say, it's not down to you. I'm the messenger in the middle. I'm passing messages on and I'm giving advice to parties. It's either going to work or it's not going to work. But like you say, at the end of the day, the conversations have to be had.
Whether
Leave
they're
it to other people to decide what they want to do. And we'll give advice, we'll help, but ultimately it's down to everyone else to decide how they want to play it. And that might be a seller accepting less, that might be a buyer accepting more. So
even though because you're a very experienced certified advanced negotiator, even though playing out those scenarios in your head is actually extremely important, because one of those scenarios are probably going to be the path we're going to go down. So at least you've kind of pre-framed, preempted, understood, and move forward. What would you say? So this is all great. You go on the market, external factors are external factors. People will make up their own decision about how much they're prepared to pay for a property with good advice and that kind of thing. The banks are going to agree or disagree, because generally most people are buying with mortgages. When it gets to the stage of finding a reliable conveyancer, what do you think is the key things there? Because I know, and it's our average days to exchange, because of just generally stuff, have extended a little bit, because I don't want to blame the conveyancers entirely for that, because there's also chains collapse and have to get re-agreed, so that causes things to slow down again. But what I do know is some solicitors are great, some are absolutely terrible. So what would be your advice to any buyer or seller try and find a reliable conveyancer?
Right. If you're looking for a reliable conveyancer, and it is so important right now because, like you say, there are definitely slowdowns in terms of the conveyancing process. And as you say, that's not just down to conveyancing always, although sometimes it very much is, but it is just actually where the housing market isn't necessarily as buoyant and as strong as it has been in the past. And it can be a little bit more flaky at times. You're having more chains collapse. But that still means to me that the importance of having the right conveyancer is actually tenfold. If you're in a confusing housing market, let's say at the moment, because obviously current events, including our general election and everything else, it's making for a market that we don't really know where we stand. No one really knows exactly where we are. We're just finding our way through it. Whilst that's happening, you have to try and get your transactions through as quickly as you possibly can to ensure that there's not any drastic changes that are going to impact things for you. So finding the right conveyancer is like absolutely top priority because they can make or break a sale easily. Finding the right ones, I would say recommendations. So in most cases, I would actually say, apart from when it comes to us, but in most cases, I would actually say don't go for the ones that your agent or your broker are recommending. And I only say it because in a lot of cases, they're recommending them just because they get a really good referral fee. So they are recommending the solicitor who's prepared to pay them the highest amount of money. That doesn't mean that they're the best conveyancer. We don't do that. I will highlight. I am very picky, as Perry knows, on who we use for conveyancing. And if somebody that I do recommend lets me down, maybe once I can allow, twice they're out. That's it. I'm not using them again. I'm not recommending them. They're done.
Mm.
But the reason I recommend the ones that I am recommending, and I've got 3 at the moment that I say are brilliant, is because I've dealt with them on a property transaction that a seller or a buyer has chosen them. I've not necessarily known who they were before that, and I've just ended up coming across them, and they've been fantastic. So you've got to be really careful with going with recommendations, but I would generally avoid the ones that just your high street agent or your broker says, yeah, use them. Secondly, if family and friends recommend them, find out when they used them, because conveyancers and the quality of conveyancers can definitely change quite quickly. And that normally depends on their caseload and things like that. If they suddenly become way too busy and they've taken on way too much, they're going to have major delays. There's going to be problems. I've got one at the moment, for example, where a buyer was recommended by a friend to use someone. They've currently lost quite a lot of their staff in their office, and I've been chasing to get inquiries reviewed for a month. Just replies to inquiries. So they're just replies to the questions that she's asked, and it's taken a month to get them even looked at. And her phone call to me the other day after an email that was fairly strongly worded, let's say, um, was effectively, she phoned me up and said, I'm sorry, I'm drowning. But those buyers had used her on the recommendation of someone who'd used that firm, not even that person, that firm 3 years previously. That's
When they
not a
weren't.
current relevant recommendation.
Yeah.
So you have to be really conscious of when people use them and check Google and reviews and all the rest of it as well, and just make sure that it's relevant, basically, what you're looking at.
I think the caseload is so important, as in, like, I'll be asking the question, because what tends to happen is the cheapest solicitors have the highest caseload, right? Because naturally people think, oh, great, I'm getting a great deal. They were going to charge me 1,200 quid. You're going to charge me 7. I'll go with you. but that's because they're managing or having to manage probably 150 cases at a time to get it through.
They are known as factory conveyancers. It's just
And
like a process. No one's
and that's when you're
personal.
sitting there having to wait 2 weeks for inquiries. Now, if you've got a 2 week response time to a bunch of inquiries, and there are 3 bunches of inquiries answered, that's 6 weeks of delay just because they've got this protocol. Um, so I guess my advice on that is just question the caseload. The lowest, it, like most things, estate agents, anything. Sometimes if you buy cheap, there's usually a reason for that, and it will become very painful because an agent is only as good as the solicitor. Once the deal's been agreed, we have very little influence other than progressing, doing our best to say, well, look, can you get those inquiries back as soon as possible rather than next week? If they're your recommended one, then you've got a little bit more clout with that as well.
But then on that, I was just about to say one of my recommended ones emailed us about a month ago now saying, look, we can't take any more referrals at the moment. We're at capacity. We're trying to find more people to come on board to help, but we can't take any more. Now, I really appreciate that from a conveyancer because that
Mm.
means to me they are absolutely putting their clients' needs first, not the businesses. So from that point of view, when they can take my referrals again, they will be the people I refer to first and foremost, because I know then that they've got the case capacity to actually deal with people effectively and that they're going to be putting the clients first. Because if
Yeah,
you've got
agreed.
someone that puts the clients first as well, if there are any issues that then come up in the process, which unfortunately that's a high chance that there will be because the process is not simple and straightforward. So if there are problems, you know that they will actually take it upon themselves to prioritize the right people at the right time rather than just kind of saying, oh well, it's a problem and you're just in a queue. That's the order we deal with things.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Good advice. Good advice. So then,
On that though, Perry, as well, because obviously again, like we say, with chains and conveyancing and everything else, there are a lot of delays at the moment. What would you say can be done for people who are stuck in chains that are causing quite long delays?
really tricky because when you're in it, it's hard to get out of it. It's doing all you can to not get in it in the first place. But I guess my advice to that is the client has to be the driver, because if you're ringing up a solicitor weekly, and I've got one at the minute, for example, there's delays, but the delays are being caused by our seller. And so I'm like, I can only progress this as fast as you can move. Um, Still, as 4 weeks later, still it was supposed to have exchanged by now, but 4 weeks later, we still haven't had the protocol forms returned. Timing was tricky, something happened and delays, and that's all. I get all that, but that just means that the sales are now going to be delayed to exchange. And I think it's just proactive. One thing you're really good at is progressing a sale rather than just updating parties of where it's at. Some estate agents update, some progress, and that can be things like I've got one at the minute. There's an inquiry, and no one can help this because we've had to ask the council a question, and they've got a 28-day answer timeline. Now, if that question wasn't needed to be asked to the council, then it would be 24 hours. So we would have saved 28 days to exchange it on that transaction. But I would say when you're selling, get your solicitor instructed at the point of going on the market. That would help a lot. We're going to be doing a lot more of that the rest of this year, just to try and get 4 weeks ahead of when a sale's been agreed. Choose the right solicitor. Have your agent ask them when do you progress my sale once you've agreed the sale. Very few sellers have ever asked me that whenever I'm in their living room advising them on how to get their house sold for the best price quickest. Whereas I'd love it because I'd be like, yeah, Mondays are totally focused on updating clients, progressing my sales through that I've agreed. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are focused on selling new properties. So that's what I'd say. Preparation early, go to the market positive that you're going to go under offer in a fair amount of time and get a head start on your legals.
The one thing I would add to that as well is just make sure that your agent is chasing the other agents in the chain as well. Because if there is a long chain, it's all very well and good pushing your link to get to the point where it's ready and good and ready to go. But if everybody else is lagging, then actually you're still stuck. You've still got nothing else going on. If your agent is speaking to other agents involved and making sure that things are moving quickly. I've got one at the moment, for example, whereby we're at the point of inquiries being raised, searches being ordered. That's fairly well progressed. Mortgage offers in, great. My seller's purchase, they hadn't even received the draft contract. So I'm chasing up the agent above to chase up their client to get the protocol forms returned. So things like that, again, like you say, difference between progression and chasing. What I'd say is just, yeah, it's great to just chase things through, but it doesn't actually get anywhere. But ultimately doing something proactive that means that another agent or a solicitor or a client or whoever is doing what they need to do throughout the whole chain, not just the one part that you're involved in.
I've had times when I'm clearly speaking to agents in links above, and they're just not, the lights are on but no one's at home kind of thing. So I've been like, look, do you want to give me that solicitor's details? I'll save you the aggravation. No point me chasing you if you chase them. I'll just skip you, try and get this through for everybody, and I'll deal directly with that solicitor. And sometimes they'll give it out. Some, oh, I can't do that. But the ones that want to take an easy life will normally give you the details and you can just sidestep them. Final question. One of the final questions. Should a buyer renegotiate after survey?
So surveys is a good one. I always like this question. Yes, once you've taken the right steps, you should absolutely, once you've had a survey back, look into renegotiating if there are problems, but take the right relevant steps before you do that. There are too many buyers who read a report and panic because no survey reads well. Not a single one. I had one recently that, to me, where I've seen a lot of surveys, read brilliantly, but the buyer was freaking out over the fact that it was coming up saying there were problems with gas, problems with the electrics, problems with, and I was like, then they're not problems. It's just saying that the surveyor isn't actually qualified to tell you if the gas is okay, if the heating works, if the electrics are all, they're not electricians, they can't tell you that. So there are some things that you've just got to be aware of, come up in every single survey. But like I say, a surveyor is not, I'm always careful with surveyors. They're kind of the jack of all trades, master of none scenario, in that they don't specialize in anything. Therefore, they can give you things to look at and look into, but you need to speak to the specialist in that area. So another
And that goes
example.
down, a good example of that is you can have a building surveyor or a building surveyor, but they can't even tell you on the structural adequacy. They'll just highlight that you need a structural engineer.
Yeah, exactly. I had one as well, going back a few years, but I remember it so clearly, where a surveyor basically highlighted in the report that the chances were that the buyers were going to need to get a completely new roof. And this was on a house that was built in the 80s. So I was like, it's not like it's substantially old that it's going to be massive problems. And the buyer phoned me up, say, well, this is going to cost me maybe £20,000. Like, that's the estimated value that the surveyor has put on the report of me getting the roof fixed, because it's going to need a new roof. And so I said to him, get a roofer around then. Don't assume that's the case. Get a roofer to come around and look at the property. The roofer went round and said, there's 3 slip tiles. It's going to cost you £300. That was it.
Wow.
£20,000 was actually 300. So you have to get the right professional in to actually look at the damage, but also those people will give you accurate quotes. So I'm not saying that you don't necessarily need to renegotiate, because in some cases there are problems and they do need to be looked at and they are unexpected and need to be addressed. But again, you can't look at what prices a surveyor gives you as a rough estimate. You have to get the right people through the door. So one issue that comes up a lot is damp problems, because especially in our area, there's a lot of Victorian properties. It's known for the fact that actually damp is an issue. In a lot of cases, the sellers had damp proof courses already done and the surveyor just hasn't realised. So again, check. But then actually get a damp surveyor to go round and have a look at the property and come back to you with a quote and get it all sorted. And then from there, you've got the correct tools that you need as a buyer to be able to actually go and negotiate effectively. Because if you go in there and just say, oh, it might cost me 10 grand, I want 10 grand off, the seller's not going to do that unless you've got something to back it up. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't cost 10 grand, it costs 5. And all of a sudden, we're talking a much easier number to renegotiate on. So just do your research.
I think as well with in England, unlike Scotland, every offer with a private treaty property sale, there's other sale methods, auction, committed transaction that we kind of invented that we do some of, that you've done some good ones of those. But generally, all offers are always subject to contract and survey. The contract bit is there's never normally problems on that. The survey bit there sometimes is. What I would say is when it comes to renegotiation, be happy to expect. So let's say a survey comes up and there's some potential problems. You have, as you've said, the experts look into it and they've highlighted it is or isn't a problem. I think there's a lot of storms in teacups when it comes to surveys. Like people panic, like you said. Don't have your uncle that was a bricklayer once upon a time do the survey. If you're going to have one done, get it done properly. And if and be happy for if there are problems that have been highlighted. Now, bear in mind, many sellers have owned houses for 10 years and maybe didn't have a survey when they bought it, haven't had it surveyed since they've owned it, so probably are fully unaware of some potential things that might well be problems. Be happy and expect the owner to rectify them before you buy it as well. So I think like renegotiation doesn't always have to be around price. It could be, look, I'm happy to pay the same price, but I've had a survey done. Here's a copy. I've had a roofer look, a damp specialist look, and it's coming in at about £5,000 worth of remedial works. Many sellers will be like, no worries, I'll get that all done. So on completion, you'll have your guarantee certificates. Don't just look at it as an opportunity to renegotiate the price down, because that's when it can go loggerheads, totally wrong, and be reasonable with it or risk losing the house. Because what I find the most trickiest part of our job is principles. And we can negotiate until we're blue in the face, but a lot of the time it's like just out of principle, they're not having that. And emotions, it's the most emotionally fueled time moving house for anybody. So that's my advice as well. Get it done properly.
I totally agree on what you were saying about emotions as well, because you are so stressed during that process. Any little thing can tip you over the edge, and that's for buyers or sellers. But buyers, I suppose, need to be aware of the fact that actually, again, if you go in guns blazing trying to get a really good offer on a property after a survey or something, that could impact a seller's onward purchase as well. It's not just going to be a case of they just want, 5,000 off the house. If they're stretched already, that 5,000 might mean they can't buy the house that they want to buy, and all of a sudden it becomes this massive thing. So like you say, sometimes they can just do it themselves and sort it. But I would say also be open to the fact that actually sometimes there needs to be a bit of give and take as well. You're potentially going to you don't want to buy a house with loads of problems, but you're also going to benefit from the works being done. So actually a lot of the time a 50-50 split is also a really fair way of handling it. The seller doesn't necessarily take the entire hit for the work being done for something that they've lived with and never had any problems with in their mind. But the buyer is still getting some compensation for the fact that they need to spend a bit more money than they thought. But I think at 50-50, it normally then isn't so much that it's going to be a drastic impact on anyone's purchase or onward chain or anything like that. But it's a fair way of making sure that everyone ends up walking away happy.
I had a situation recently, so to kind of close this off, because we don't want to go on for too long, but it's been great advice shared. But I had a situation on the renegotiation. I had a very unreasonable renegotiation from a buyer, and he was being very stubborn and unreasonable. Anyway, it all went to loggerheads. Sale fell through. He called me back 2 weeks later to be like, what's going on with that property? I was like, oh, really sorry. We've agreed the sale to somebody else at £5,000 more than you were paying. Fully aware of the problems that were so called, brought up in your survey. That's cost him a survey and time and rent and money, and potentially having to pay more for a similar kind of property. So it's just, this is where our job comes in, to keep all the emotions and stuff in check. I think we're like a therapist after time, with a bit of negotiation thrown in there. So there we go. That was really good. That was 48 minutes. Steph, thanks for your time. We're going to try and do these more and more, because there's so many questions that we answer on a day-to-day basis to our clients on the phone, and I want to get those on video. We're all about sharing the best advice to get you moved as smoothly as possible for the best price. We will see you on the next one. Thank you for your time.